A jet cruising at 38,000 feet of altitude suddenly suffered a complete loss of power, abrupt and unexpected. In a matter of seconds, the crew was forced to fly blind, trying urgently to locate a runway where they could descend, facing one of the most demanding circumstances any pilot could endure. What followed would become one of the most astonishing and unforgettable episodes in world aviation. On September 7, 2010, the scene was set at Polyarny Airfield in Russia. Just a few minutes past 3 in the morning, on the airport apron, Alrosa Airlines Flight 514 stood ready to begin its journey toward Moscow Domodedovo International Airport. It was a domestic route of 3,890 kilometers, with a scheduled duration of 5.5 hours. The aircraft assigned was a Tupolev Tu-154, a Soviet-built trijet inspired by the famous Boeing 727 and designed in the early 1970s. This narrow-body airliner could carry up to 180 occupants, and despite its age, it was still flying with several airlines across the country. At the controls was Captain Evgeny Novoselov, 41 years old with over 8,500 hours of flight experience. Beside him, First Officer Andrei Leman, age 43, had accumulated around 10,500 flight hours. Unlike in Western airlines, where these roles had long disappeared, Russian crews still included a flight engineer, in this case Sergei Talalayev, and a navigator, Rafik Karimov. The crew was completed by 5 flight attendants, while 72 passengers were seated on board, bringing the total number of people aboard to 81. Minutes later, after completing engine startup and taxi without incident, Flight 514 was cleared for takeoff at 3:27 a.m. local time. The pilots advanced the throttles and the aircraft began to gather speed, climbing smoothly with nothing out of the ordinary. During the first hours, passengers remained relaxed in their seats. Some were asleep while others enjoyed the onboard service. After roughly 3.5 hours of flight, the aircraft reached its cruising altitude of 34,800 feet, or 10,600 meters, flying over the region near the city of Usin. Up to that point, everything had unfolded normally. It was a routine flight. Suddenly, the autopilot disconnected without warning, catching the pilots by surprise. Although it did not seem alarming, they attempted to reconnect it, but the system would not respond. Puzzled, the aviators went through the emergency checklist, thinking they might have overlooked something. At that moment, they were still unaware that something far more serious was about to occur. Shortly after, the electrical systems began shutting down one by one, and the alarms started sounding. To make matters worse, the navigation system also failed. The captain attempted to establish contact with air traffic control, but the radios had stopped working as well. The controller only received a brief call from Flight 514 indicating that they were experiencing difficulties, but there was no time to explain the gravity of the situation, and no further transmissions could be made. From that point on, the crew was completely on their own, with no cities visible anywhere around them. The captain received another alarming report from the flight engineer. The electric fuel pumps had also failed. Without these pumps, the flow of fuel to the engines would soon be interrupted, causing them to shut down. The crew estimated they had roughly 30 minutes before the instruments went completely dead and the engines stopped running. Faced with this critical situation, their only option was to descend below the clouds and search visually for a suitable place to attempt an emergency landing. The captain initiated the descent, and once they broke through the cloud layer, they were met with a bleak sight. An endless forest cut through by a long river, with no towns or cities anywhere in view. Up to that point, there were no clearings large enough to land, nor was there an airport nearby. Captain Novoselov had no other choice but to consider a forced ditching in the river, fully aware of the enormous risks it carried. As they were mentally preparing for that outcome, they suddenly spotted a glimmer of hope in the distance, a runway. It seemed impossible. There it was, in the middle of the forest, and yet it did not appear on any aeronautical chart. That unlikely strip of asphalt became their only option, and the captain decided to begin an approach. But there was another problem. With no communications, they could not confirm whether other aircraft were nearby, which heightened the risk of collision. Even so, they had no alternative and guided the aircraft toward the mysterious airfield, beginning their descent. The runway was very short, far shorter than what a Tupolev Tu-154 required to stop safely. When they were just a few miles from the strip, they tried to extend the flaps, but the system would not respond. A Tu-154 can land without flaps, but it requires a much higher approach speed. The captain devised a partial solution. He instructed the flight attendants to move some passengers toward the front of the cabin, increasing the pressure on the wheels and helping during braking. At last, they committed to the landing attempt, but the rate of descent was insufficient, and if they continued, they would overshoot the runway threshold. Faced with this, they chose to abort the first approach. With the experience of the previous approaches, the pilots began their third and likely final attempt. This time, familiar with the runway, they finally managed to touch down, though at a speed exceeding 350 kilometers per hour, far too fast to stop within the short strip available. The aircraft ran off the end of the runway, knocking down several trees, but miraculously came to a halt just 160 meters from the edge. Fortunately, none of the 81 people on board were injured. Passengers later recalled that they had not realized anything was wrong until the moment they began crashing into the trees. The subsequent investigation determined that the complete system's failure was caused by overheating of the aircraft's batteries, triggered by thermal runaway. Both Captain Novoselov and First Officer Liman were awarded the title of Heroes of the Russian Federation, while the rest of the crew received the Order of Courage of Russia. The mystery of the runway hidden in the forest was explained by Sergei Sotnikov, who for 12 years had meticulously maintained the helicopter landing strip at Izma, a small town in the northern Komi Republic, even after the airport had been officially closed. Thanks to his dedication, the runway was ready to receive Flight 514, saving the lives of all passengers and crew.